And I can't do anything with this, can I? I can just move it around. All righty. Good to see you all again. In this February month, it's new month. Remember, you have until Friday for the quiz if you haven't taken it yet, so please take the quiz. I guess that's all. The other thing I guess I could mention is paper's not due until the end of March, yes. But nevertheless, I might want to talk about, give you some advisement on how to write a paper because no one ever really did it with me when I was going through school, even graduate school. Thought it might be helpful. I'm not going to do it now. I might not do it Thursday, but I think in the next week or 2 weeks or so, I do want to spend some time, maybe 15 minutes, just going over, giving some advice about, how you can write a good paper, which might be helpful in other classes as well. All right, but just remind me about that if I seem to forget, but I'll try to remember. Okay, February. Why is February important? What is significant about the month of February? Nothing? You haven't been checking your emails? Yes, Ms. Mostiller? It is Black History Month. Hello, Mr. Clyde. What? And so, during Black History Month, or the special months, we have Black History Month, and the next month is Women's History Month. And then, in the future, we have like Asian Pacific Islander in May, but we don't have a class on May except for the final, so I can't do anything with that. And then we have like, Native American Heritage Month and stuff like that. So I try to honor these months, but recognize them, but also bring them into the ambit of the Catholic faith at a Catholic institution by talking about Black Americans who were Catholic, but not just Catholic, but they're on their way to sainthood. Okay? And I'll start today with this beautiful woman, Mother Elizabeth Clarice Lang. Venerable. Yes. What does that mean? Well, there are different stages, in on the pathway to being declared an official saint. Really, being declared a saint is just kind of like being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Yeah, that's really what it's kind of like. Yeah. Doesn't mean just because someone doesn't have saint in front of their name doesn't mean they actually did not live a life as a saint or die as a saint. God knows. But there are some people who are kind of such good examples. We want to honor them. Okay. And the first stage is venerable. The first stage is servant of God. Servant of God. Basically, a person dies and everyone kind of agrees that, Bill or Jane was a really holy person, really in love with the Lord. Maybe even some weird spiritual things happen, miracles or something, through the prayers of this person or whatever. But anyways, some weird spiritual stuff. And so it might be an indication of God's favor. So they open the investigation. They declare they recognize the holiness of the person, servant of God. That's the beginning level. Okay, that's the bottom level. You start as a servant of God. And in some cases, some people, hello, Mr. Celestin, some people don't progress past the servants of God. I don't know why. Well, sometimes I guess they don't have enough information or evidence sometimes. Because you need evidence. You need more proof. Because you start reading the person's writings, any writings they left. You talk to people who knew them, if they're still around. Interview people who knew the person to make sure that they were phonies. They were truly holy, good people. Right? If all of that shakes out, and you're confident that this person probably was a saint, then they can go to the next level and be declared venerable or honorable, which means that they can be officially honored in the church. Okay? Prayed to. Make holy cards and pass them out. Venerable. All right? And then the investigation continues. And this takes years and years and years, sometimes centuries in the case of some people. But, because you need what's called a postulator. You need someone to promote, and a lot, who has the time to
first of all, who has the time? But also, it takes time. And even if you have, if you're just a person like me, who's going to do it? But if you're a member of like a group of nuns, like she was, or monks or something, then the order will do it for you. It'll do it. So it's, usually it's monks and nuns and priests and people like that who are going through the process, trying to incorporate more non-clergy. They've been trying to do that over the last several decades, but it's tough because you have who's going to postulate their cause, do the investigation, collect the materials. All right, then you're waiting for a miracle. You're waiting for some actual supernatural proof that like God's giving His approval, saying yes, this person, you're right to consider this person venerable and even a saint. So you want to look for something, usually a healing or something that is completely inexplicable. It can't be something that, well, possibly it could be this. No, it's something that modern medical science says this is not normal. This should not happen. Cancer shouldn't just disappear overnight. It's not normal. Okay? And if that happens and it's confirmed, then the person becomes declared a blessed so-and-so. And then you wait for another miracle. You have to have two. And if that happens and it's confirmed, then finally the Pope will declare the person officially a saint, a holy person. Right? But all through this process, the person may have been in heaven already with God. just waiting, And we'll see in the case of some people, they're still waiting. And I think they should have been saints a long time ago. But anyway, so she is Venerable Mary Lang. That's an actual picture of her. Who was she? Well, she was born in 1784, around 1784. And she died in 1882. Okay? And I guess you'd have to say she was a naturalized citizen because she wasn't born in the United States. She was born in Cuba. All right? What did I say, 1784? Or 74? Sorry. That's how I remember. 84 to 82. 1882. She was born in Cuba. She might have been Haitian. Okay, her family might have originally come from Haiti, then gone to Cuba, and somewhere in the early 1800s they emigrated to the United States. When I say emigrated, somehow. Yeah. But they moved up to the United States. Okay, and she was living in Baltimore, Maryland, the state of Maryland, where there was a large Catholic population. In fact, it was the Catholic colony. It was established for was it Calvert? I forget his name, but anyways, it was established for given as a land grant to a Catholic aristocrat by the King of England, specifically for colonization by Catholics. So there's a lot of Catholics there. So that's kind of, I guess, the natural place where they would have gone, as she was Catholic. And so they went to Baltimore, Maryland, and she taught children from the Caribbean in her home, other children. When I say from the Caribbean, meaning children of color, that, maybe the white schools weren't going to teach at the time, or no schools were teaching because, this is the early 1800s. There might have been no schools, but certainly if you were black or dark skinned, you clearly weren't Anglo-Saxon something. You weren't probably going to be in the school with the other kiddies. Anyways, a French priest, a Father James Joubert, who was a French priest, noticed her work and asked her to start a school for black girls. And she said, yeah. Okay, because she actually did want to start a religious order of sisters. Okay, so this seemed providential. And in 1829, that's what she did. She started what are called the Oblate Sisters of Providence. The Oblate Sisters of Providence. What's an oblate? Oblate, or an oblation, is simply a fancy Latin word for an offering. Okay, you're offering yourself to the service of God. Okay, so the offered sisters of Providence, God's care, His providence, right? Another word for God, So the Oblate Sisters of Providence. And this is significant because it's actually the first group of black religious in the church, of true, not, black, Black. I'm assuming in the church, not just in America, but certainly in America. But anyways, doesn't just anyway. But she founded the first religious order, which still exists to this day. The sisters are still around. There she is in her habit with her rosary, beautiful old woman. Well, she's old here. But yeah. And yeah, so the first group of black sisters, black religious, because of course, if there were black Catholics, male or female, probably wouldn't be admitted anyways into the white orders. So that's just the way it was for a long, long time in this country. Anyway, to 2023, she was servant of God for the longest time, and finally, thanks be to God, Pope Francis raised her to the level of venerable in 2023. Mother Mary Lang. So I ask Mother Mary, Venerable Mary Lang, for her prayers for us in this class. Amen. Notice today that today is the feast day of Saint Blaise, Bishop and Martyr. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? If you're Catholic, the feast day of Saint Blaise, Bishop and Martyr. What little custom happens on that day? A tradition, if you will. Not a sacred tradition, Mr. Crawford, but a tradition. Yes, Ms. Woto? Yeah, the blessing of the throats. Priest hauls out the candles, blessed candles, and unlit. In the old days, they were supposed to be lit, but I don't think they, wanted to burn people's ears off. So they're usually unlit and blesses your throat through the prayers of Saint Blaise, Bishop and Martyr, etc. and so forth, of throat ailments. So we do these kind of things. Apparently, the story I always heard, who knows if it's true, because a lot of the saints, people were known to be saints after people were venerating them, and then sometimes people just made up stories, like we'll find out they did about Jesus as well. So there's a story that some kid was choking on a fish bone, and Saint Blaise, blessed him, and the fish bone popped out or went through or whatever. I don't know, but saved the kid from choking. They didn't know the Heimlich maneuver back then. What were you going to do? Watch the kid die, but he intervened. So that's why they do it, just to bless people's throats with St. Blaise in honor of that. So I don't know if the priest is going to do it today. They do have, 12:30? They have Mass over there on Tuesdays in the chapel, the Holy Eucharist. I think it's at 12:30. We'll have to see. I don't know if the priest after the liturgy will offer to bless throats. If you would like a blessing, I can give it to you. I am an installed acolyte. I was in the seminary studying to be a priest. And so a bishop installed me as an altar server, an official altar server. I serve at the altar. So in extraordinary circumstances, I can give blessings. But any Christian can give a blessing. God bless you, sir. There you go. I just blessed him. It's not the same as a priest's blessing, which is, I guess you could say, more lasting and permanent, and of a different kind. Nevertheless, if you would like me to say a little prayer in the name of St. Blaise, Bishop and Martyr, for your throat, come up and ask me. If you don't, I'll pray for you. That nobody has any throat problems in the class during the semester. All right. Jesus. Where are we here? Where did we stop? All right. Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus the Nazarene. You got his dates there and some pictures. Interesting. Anyone notice anything interesting about these pictures of Jesus the Nazarene? Anyone notice anything interesting? Noteworthy? Yes, Mr. Crawford. Yeah, interesting, isn't that? Yes, these pictures are from. Oh, sorry. If I walk back, then people can't hear me on the video. Sorry. I bought a microphone, but it hasn't come yet. These pictures are from catacombs. Catacombs, which are underground graveyards. People will bury people underground, underneath this, outside of the city and underneath the city, or underneath the ground. So you have all these tombs and passageways with little niches and open or things that have been carved out in the walls where you can place the body, stuff like that. And yeah, there are pagan catacombs, but there are Jewish catacombs and there are Christian catacombs. And that's where we get our earliest iterations of Christian art, depictions from the story of Jesus and pictures of Jesus and the apostles and stuff like that. Okay, so these are pictures. These are our earliest, some of our earliest, 200s AD, from a variety of catacombs in the city of Rome. And as Mr. Crawford pointed out, yeah, Jesus is wearing a toga. He's got short hair, no beard. He's clean shaven. Clean shaven. A lot of these images are of the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus, which would make sense for a burial ground, you know, Jesus raising someone from the dead. Okay. This is our earliest image from the 300s, another set of catacombs in Rome. This is our earliest image of the traditional looking Jesus with long hair and a beard. Yes. And a halo. Notice he doesn't have any halo or nimbus in any of these. Okay? But Jesus now has the halo of like a saint or a holy person, holy man. So this is where our image, but this was the early image. If you were living 100 years before, this might be how you conceived and envisioned Jesus in your memory of what he might have looked like. Because, of course, nobody knew, except those who knew him personally. And here we get this more traditional one. Why? Well, you know, he was an Easterner, and in the culture, the Eastern Mediterranean, they grew beards. That was typical of, that was usually considered, it was a cultural thing. And whereas Westerners, like in Italy, were clean shaven, known for being clean shaven. Okay, so so why did Jesus develop a beard? Why is he clean shaven? Maybe because they're representing him according to their culture in Italy, okay, where they did not normally wear beards because you would be seen as a Greek or an Easterner. And then he's shown more Eastern, maybe because he came from the East. So that's why he has a beard. But I don't know. As a Jew, I know Jews are not supposed to cut the sides of their temples, the hair of their temples. So a lot of them just let it grow. Not supposed to trim their beards, but it doesn't say they have to have a beard in the law of God. Just said they're not supposed to trim their beards. So I guess if you have a beard, usually. So, you know, but I don't know. Even Jews today, some Jews have beards and what are called the peyot, you know, the long, they don't cut the sides of their temples, the temple hair. But other Jews are just are clean shaven with no beards, and don't know. But interesting, I think. What did Jesus look like? All right, and speaking of the Jews, let's start with the Jews. Before we talk about Jesus, I think I should say something about the Jews. The most essential fact about Jesus the Nazarene was that he was a Jew. He was a Jewish man. Mr. Celestin, all the way back there now, not up here? There? Here? Not? Mr. Crawford, you're regressing too. Oh, you admit it. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. Okay, I gotta up my game. All right. The Jews, Jesus was a Jewish man. And so, and Christianity is a Jewish religion, a Jewish-based religion. Just can't get around the Jews. So to talk about Jesus, we have to see him from this perspective of Jewish religion and culture. And at the heart of Judaism is their covenant with God, that they have a special relationship, a contract called a covenant. And that's all a covenant is. It's a contract, an agreement. All right, that's all it means. All right. They have a special relationship with the God of the universe that no other group of people has. In Hebrew, you see the word is berit that's used. And literally, that word means a chain, something that they're chained to God. God is chained to them. God is kind of like, if you ever see I don't know, sometimes you see it in shows or comedies or whatever, where, like people get, handcuffed together and they lose the key. Or you see that in like a movie or a TV show or something. People get handcuffed and then they lose the key. That's supposed to, and hilarity ensues, right? Because they can't separate each other. They're handcuffed together. God is handcuffed to the Jews and vice versa. Barit, it's a bond, a fetter, a chain. And just like, God does this freely, Mr. Walker. God is not, remember what I said before about Revelation, just like Revelation. God is not bound to enter into a relationship with any of us, Jew or non-Jew, male or female. But he chooses, the story is that he chooses to, with this dude called Abram, or Abraham, all right? Basically the same name, just different versions of the same name. Just go with it. Sometimes I call him Abram, sometimes I call him Abraham. I'm talking about the same person, all right? But this guy, Abraham, or Abram, and his wife, Sarai, I shouldn't forget her. Shouldn't forget her. Obviously, she's the one having the kids, right? Well, I don't know these days. I don't know. Someone tell me what's going on. I don't know what's good. I don't know. I'm not sure that women can have children. Just exclusively women, I should say that. All right, shut up, Doctor. I'm getting fired. Anyway, Sarai, God reveals himself to Abram. It's nothing that this guy Abram does, which is kind of interesting because in other religions, like Hinduism, stuff like that, it's usually the gods are kind of like give a boon, just like a gift to some human. They reveal themselves because some human forces them to fasts for like 20 years or does some spiritual exercise that really impress the god, kind of obligate the god to tell him something, reveal the Vedas, or something like that. Anyways, if you're taking world religions, then maybe you know about the Vedas. Yes. But he does. God completely. There's nothing about Abram that in the Bible that we know of that distinguished him necessarily. Just the God of the universe says, I'm going to be your God, and you and your family, which is interesting because Abram was an old guy, had no children, had no family to speak of, which was him and Sarai, his wife. I'm going to make of you a great nation, and I will be the God of that nation. Okay. And, I'm not going to get into the whole story of Abram, which is kind of funny in its own right. The God of Israel, Jewish God, has a real great sense of humor. That's why I love love reading the Bible, Book of Genesis. The comedy kind of writes itself sometimes. Anyways, they eventually do have a child. Actually, they have a couple of children. The first child is rejected, because Abram's, knowing his wife, Sarai, is, husband and wives do, but Sarai's not getting pregnant, right? She's barren, as they say, okay? Infertile. That's the biblical view. Of course, written by men, I would imagine, so it didn't occur to them that Abram might have been shooting blanks. Just saying, who knows, it goes both ways, doesn't it? But apparently, in the biblical author's mind, it was all on Sarai. He's barren. So Abram gets a little bit antsy because, the Lord promised me a big family and land, too, a nation, a place to live with my big family. But nothing's happening, This God revealed himself, and then he's like, disappeared. He's not doing nothing. Where are the children at, So he takes his slave girl. They have a slave girl named Hagar. He has sex with her with Sarai's permission. Sarai, in fact, according to the biblical text, suggests it. you know, which, Mr. Heisler, I mean, if your wife suggests to you that you have sex with some young slave girl, I mean, can you really say no? It, so Abram has sex with her. She is fertile, though. She gives birth to a son, Ishmael. So technically, Abram's first son is Ishmael, who should be, I guess, the the never fails. Who should be I guess, the recipient of the promise, right? I mean, he's the firstborn son, I guess, not from Abram and Sarai, but from Abram, right? So you think that, but no, God bless you. No, God doesn't want Ishmael. God's got other plans for Ishmael that we don't know about. So Ishmael leaves the story. No, it's this other child. God's basically like, okay, Abraham, I know you're kind of shaky in your faith with me, but so you tried to kind of like force my hand, but I will intervene. And finally, God does intervene, and hallelujah, Sarai does become pregnant with their son Isaac. Isaac, right? So he's the result of the promise, not Ishmael. Isaac is the result of the promise because he comes from Abram and Sarai. Okay, legitimate. However, I have Isaac in smaller type and he's not in bold because Isaac really isn't that important to the story. He's more of a bridge to his son, who is Abraham's grandson, Jacob. This guy Jacob. So Isaac gets married to a couple of women. I'm just saying, when two women want to marry you, can you really say no, Mr. Smith? Yeah. Oh, Miss Suter, you're here. Hello, Miss Suter. And so he does, and his first child is Isaac. Actually, excuse me, wrong. Isaac had one, but Jacob has two. I'll get to that in a second. My mistake. Isaac marries Rebecca. And they have a child, Jacob. He's the important one. Actually, they have a couple of kids, but Jacob's the important one. He's the one the story focuses on. Because it's from him that the tribes of Israel, these various families, will come. What we'll later call the Jews. Not from Abram, even though he's the great ancestor. God reveals himself to Abram and Sarai and calls Abram to be with him. But it's actually, interestingly enough, Jacob who is also called Israel. Again, he has two names here. His name is Jacob, but eventually God changes his name to Israel. And he's the one who married his two wives. Sorry about that. He has Leah and Rachel. And from them, he has a whole bunch of kids. All right. In fact, it turns into like a pregnancy war. First Leah starts having a bunch of kids, and Rachel gets jealous. She's like, "Oh, why has the Lord forgotten me? I'm not having any kids." And then the Lord blesses Rachel, and she starts having kids as well. But not enough kids, because Jacob's a little bit antsy. He wants more kids. Well, he's got some slave girls too. And again, oh, Mr. Lee, oh, Mr. Lee. They can't say no. I mean, come on, when the babes are throwing themselves at you, what are you going to do? Say no? And he doesn't, and he has some more kids from the slave girls. 12 in total. Well, actually, it depends on how you count it. But traditionally, 12. The 12 tribes of Israel. Yes, you've heard of this? The 12 sons of Israel. These 12 men from whom their families, they have children, okay? And they become tribes or groups, okay? So you have the 12 groups that come from this man, Jacob, also called Israel. So Israel is not a country. It's not a nation state, not a kingdom. It's a man. when the Jews are called Israelites in the Bible, well, literally what the Hebrew says is sons and daughters of Israel. They translate it as Israelites. Okay? But it's the sons, they're the sons and daughters of Jacob, who is Israel. So it's the name of a man. They're descended from this man who is descended from this other man, Abram. So they are the people, truly the people of Israel. They are biologically linked to this ancient ancestor, they believe. Now, the idea of their covenant with God is unique, as I mentioned, because for Israel's religion, people aren't bound to a ruler. You're not bound to most cultures, at least the surrounding cultures of the ancient Near East, people, had covenants with their rulers, okay? And the rulers, whoever the ruler was, had a relationship with the god, and might receive the laws of the community from the god or whatever. The god really didn't have much to do with anybody else, only the king or the rulers. And you were in covenant with This is different. Every Israelite is in covenant with God himself. You're not bound to any king or whatever. You're bound to your relation. Every Jew is bound to his relationship with God. And it's an exclusive relationship, meaning that the Jews cannot acknowledge any of the other gods, if there are any. And sometimes that is a question in the Bible. Sometimes it seems to recognize that there could be other gods. But it doesn't matter. The Jews are not supposed to have anything to do with them. They only worship their God, which again was unique amongst the surrounding cultures, but also seems to be unique amongst the religions of the world, because it's a lot, if you study religions and stuff, there was a lot of mixing and admixing of various gods and goddesses and stuff. It didn't, between cultures, sometimes the same god with different names, one Greek, one Latin, one German, they're basically the same god. Or, a Norseman worships Thor and Loki and all, the other Scandinavian gods. But, if you travel down to Italy where they're worshiping Saturn and what's your name? Aphrodite Venus. I'm trying to think of the Latin names. The Norsemen would have no problem going to a temple and throwing a pinch of incense to Jupiter, the god of the gods, the king of the gods, as well as, praying to Thor and stuff like that, and vice versa. There wasn't really any. But the Jews that's one thing that puzzled the other cultures around the Jews. The Jews wouldn't do that. What was so special about their God that was not special about Saturn or Molech or any of the other gods, whatever that we know about from ancient times? We can't do it because we have a contract with this God. We don't recognize any of it. That was unusual. And this God, to show the exclusive claim that this God has on the people of Israel, the sons and daughters of Israel, he gives them their own laws. He asserts his authority over them and seeks their loyalty to him, their love. So he gives them laws about how he wants to be worshipped. He gives them laws about how they're supposed to organize their social life. Okay? So they are to worship him only and to live only by his laws. That was another thing that puzzled people. When I say puzzled, Ms. Suter, I mean hated. The Jews were not liked in the ancient world. Not much has changed, has it? Well, don't confuse Israel, the modern day nation, with Jews, right? Not necessarily the same thing. At least I say that, but some Jews would say they are the same thing. But that there's even differences in divergences in Israel. But anyway, but even in the ancient world, when we have references to the Jews in society, they didn't like them. Again, because they were perceived like they were always outsiders. As I mentioned, we wouldn't worship the gods, the local gods, which was considered insulting. You're insulting the local gods, and you don't want to piss off the gods because they'll hurt you. Their God's better than ours. Really? What's so special about your storm God from the desert? If you're a Roman citizen conquering the world in front of you.
of Jews who say their God is better. That they have a revelation in their book is better than our myths. That their laws, they won't follow our laws. That's another myth. This is what I was getting to. We have laws in the different cultures, but the Jews, they got their own laws from their God. And those are what they're going to follow. So they had to make concessions to, they were the only group in the Roman Empire that had concessions. Only, the Romans didn't want to put up with them. So they said, okay, let the Jews go and do their own thing. They don't want to work on Saturdays? Fine, we won't force them to work on Saturdays. They don't want to serve in the juries because they don't want to invoke the name of false gods? Fine, we won't force them. Or serve in our military? Fine, we won't force them. But we won't like them either. We won't consider them true citizens of Rome. So their God gives them all these laws and rules to show their loyalty to him. This is at the heart of the Jewish religion, okay? That the sons and daughters, the descendants of this man, Jacob Israel, who was the descendant of this man, Abraham, have a special relationship with the God of the universe that no one else has. And that this relationship is unending. It's unbreakable. No matter what happens. No matter what happens to the Jews as a group. Whether they do have a nation. As we'll learn, like I showed you in this picture, at one time they did have a Jewish kingdom. Okay? And they had Jewish kings. You've heard of some of them maybe. King David. You've heard of King David or Solomon. Someone's as wise as Solomon. Or you might hear someone say, well, that decision was Solomonic. Yes. Cut the baby in half. Not sure the baby thought it was such a wise decision, but anyways, these are names of some of the kings and other kings you probably have not heard of. Jeroboam, Ahaz, Hezekiah, etc. and so forth. So they had kings and they had a kingdom for a period of a few centuries. Okay? And that kingdom was eventually split up. There was a minor civil war, I guess you could say, a splitting of the kingdom into north and south. They couldn't get along. And then eventually, over the vicissitudes of history, Mr. Cowan, various empires moved in and destroyed the northern kingdom first, and then eventually the southern kingdom was destroyed and the Jews were dispersed throughout, God knows where. But they never, again, so that seemed like it was the end, because their kingdom was gone. They didn't have a nation, so they didn't have land, which God had promised to Abraham. I mentioned they were supposed to worship their God, yes. Place of worship was gone. It was destroyed. The temple in Jerusalem. They had a big temple in Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. That was burned down, destroyed, eventually. So they didn't even have a temple to worship anymore. But the covenant remains, and their belief was that God would fulfill the covenant. He would restore the kingdom to Israel. He would send a king Messiah, a king Savior, to restore the fallen kingdom and to bring the Jews as a community back to the true following of their law. And there would be a reign of peace that would probably, presumably be never ending. So like an end of the world type stuff, end of time. This King Messiah would come back and there would be a reign of peace, at least for the Jews. For the enemies of the Jews, probably not. They would be destroyed. But for the Jews, it will be a reign of peace forever. And we'll talk more about this later when we talk about Jesus as the Messiah. Can't yell. My point, Mr. Celestin. God bless you. The Jews are not actors in the story of Jesus.
because Jesus is Jewish. Okay? They're not characters, like, on a stage, like this is some kind of secret drama, like at your church when you have, like, I don't know, when they have like a nativity play, of the birth of Jesus, or during Holy Week when they reenact Jesus carrying the cross. Okay? It's not a sacred drama where the Jews are just characters. And once the Jews fulfill their purpose, once Jesus shows up, the Jews can kind of like be shuffled off the stage. Okay, we don't need you anymore, Jews. Your importance has ended. No. And it's taken the church about 2,000 years to finally realize this. For a long, if you read the history of Christianity's relationship and the church's relationship with the Jews, the Jewish people, it's sometimes there have been a few nice, bright spots, but very few. Most of it, it's just like, why don't you people just accept Jesus as the Messiah? And there didn't seem to be any kind of realization that, wait a second, we're worshiping a Jew, right? It's like Jesus was Jewish, right? Do I have some kind of obligation to these people? Some, at least in gratitude, some debt that I owe them, or appreciation? It was like, no, you become Christian and stop being a Jew. Oh, okay. As if Jesus could stop being a Jew. The Jews were they're not tools. They're not means to an end. They're not they are a necessary, they're not just like some bridge that we need to get to Jesus. All right? That's why, we think about it. We'll learn about this again in a later class when we talk about the Bible. The whole first part of the Bible is not about Jesus. All right? Most of the Bible, the whole first part, are what we call the Jewish scriptures, which is a misnomer because really the Old New Testament was written by Jews too, so they're also Jewish scriptures. But just go with it, just so you understand. But and then the New Testament's added on. The New Testament doesn't come first. Shouldn't it come first if Jesus is the most important thing for a Christian? Why does it start with the book of Genesis and Abraham, the ancestor of the Jewish people? I'm Irish. I'm not Jewish. I love Father Abraham, but I'm not a Jew. I'm not descended from him. I don't owe him anything in that sense. I'm a Christian. So why don't you start with the Gospel of Matthew? Very appropriate, yes. Appropriately. Why would you stick it on the back? It's all the evidence is there if you look for it. Because you don't have the New Testament without what comes before. Jesus doesn't exist without Israel. Because the covenant still remains. It doesn't. Now, you sometimes hear people say this about the Jews now because, of course, there's a history there, and the Jews have been kind of maltreated somewhat. The Holocaust. Okay, they're not the only group of human beings that have had genocide committed against them. But we did have a world war that was kind of about that in some way. Yes, I know Germany invaded Poland and then invaded Russia, but Soviet Union. But there was the whole issue of trying to eradicate a whole group of people, namely the Semites, the Jews. So we have to be, sometimes some people are sensitive to that, maybe a little overly sensitive, not overly sensitive in the sense like I'm dismissing it, but in the sense that they want to kind of like hedge against that happening again. So say, well, God's covenant with the Jews, even without Jesus, is still valid. That's not really what the church thinks or teaches, at least from what I understand. The covenant is fulfilled. As I said, you don't have Jesus without the Jews, and you don't have the New Testament without the Old Testament. Jesus has come to fulfill God's covenant, to bring it to completion. It exists in him. He is the covenant fulfilled. So Jesus, if you want, in a manner of speaking, is for the Jews. He's not for me, not for my people, the Irish. He's the fulfillment of God's agreements with them, the Israelites, not the Gentiles. And so Christianity proclaims that Jesus the Nazarene is fulfillment of all God's revelation to the Jews, all and any covenants he's made with them. And that's why he's important with them. That's why, from the logic of Christianity, there's the desire for Jews to become Christians in the sense of accepting, because this is just a logic that seems natural, to accept Jesus as their Messiah, that God has truly been faithful and fulfilled the covenants in Jesus. He makes sense of those covenants that God has made with the Jews, Jesus. Now, of course, Jewish people would say, no. Jesus was a bad man. Jesus was a false Messiah. Okay, fine. That's a debate that can be had, should be had, maybe might be had, whatever. I don't know. But whatever. That's fine. That's a whole other question. But I'm talking as a Christian. I have to remind myself the debt of gratitude I pay to the people of Israel, because I don't worship the gods of Ireland anymore. We had gods and spirits and all sorts of stuff, I know that, through Irish mythology. And we got converted to worshiping the God of Israel, of a foreign people that my ancestors didn't even know existed. So and I think this is in our readings, I believe. I just had you read briefly from the Paul's letter to the Romans. This man Paul, yes, Gospel of, do I? Oh, maybe I don't. I thought I did. Well, I guess not. In the Christian scriptures, it might surprise you to know, like Jesus in the Gospel of John says, salvation comes from the Jews. People seem to overlook that or forget about it. Well, of course, Jesus was Jewish. Why wouldn't he say something like that? It's perfectly natural for him to believe that, And by salvation, he means himself. I'm the Savior who's come to the Jews, and anyone who believes in me will be saved, whether Jew or non-Jew. And then we have a rabbi, St. Paul, who became a believer in Jesus, a Christian, a Christian, you could say, who had, in the letter to the Romans, this is Romans chapter 11, if you're interested and want to look it up yourself, he's talking to there seems to have been a mixed community in the Christian Church of Rome. Okay? Scholars are still kind of debating, still kind of divided about, what was the makeup of the Church of Rome? Was it mainly Jews, or was it mainly Christian? Gentiles became Christians and stuff. Not exactly sure. I think it was mixed. I think there was a significant number of Jews, but I think there were definitely Gentiles, because Paul talks, sometimes he shifts his focus in his letter and talks to that group and basically says, don't treat your Jewish brothers and sister Christians, those who believe in Jesus with you, don't treat them badly, because they are, as he's described, they're like the holy root of the plant. And kind of like a person, when you take a plant or something, you graft on other parts of another plant, they'll attach and start growing together, yes? Okay? I'm not a gardener, but I've heard that gardeners do these things, I'm assuming they work, You can take two different types of plants and actually meld them together, by cutting the one into the other. And Paul uses that kind of image. He says, you Gentiles are like a wild bush that have been cut off and then cut into the holy root of the tree of Jews, of Israel. And so the sap of Israel runs through you now, and you benefit from it. So basically, be grateful. That's what he's saying in the letter to the Romans. The Jews are not rejected of God. God didn't reject them. They're not a rejected people. I guess you could say God is waiting. All right. But he hasn't waited, because he sent someone named Jesus. Jesus was his name, Mr. Walker. Jesus the Nazarene. Okay? I can skip over this. His name. Just a Hebrew name, which means God saves. All right. Or Aramaic. Yeshua, Aramaic. What is Aramaic? It's a language related to Hebrew. They're related of the same language family. Okay, but they're different languages within the same language family. Kind of like Spanish is different from French, even though they're both from the same source, which is Latin. They're in the same language family. Aramaic and Hebrew are the same language family, along with Arabic and other languages, but they're different. Okay. Aramaic was no one spoke Hebrew at the time of Jesus. In the synagogue, you encountered that nobody understood it. It was a dead language. It was only really used in the temple and in worship. You read the scriptures in Hebrew if you could understand them. Aramaic was the spoken language. It was a common language throughout the whole Middle East. Not just Jews spoke it, but in addition to languages like Greek. But his name is Aramaic, Yeshua, which in Hebrew is Yehoshua, which means God is salvation. God saves. God is the Savior. And that's his name, not Jesus Christ. His name is simply Jesus. We know of no other name for him. It's a common Jewish name. There's nothing unique, Ms. Galdi, about the name Jesus. You encounter it all the time. Joshua is the Greek form. It's come down to us in English. Is another form of Jesus. Jesus is from Latin. Joshua is from Greek. All right. And then there are variations on the name. Hosea, the prophet Hosea. Okay, his name is derived from this as well. It's the same thing, basically. It's just another version of Yeshua. God saves. God is salvation. Okay, and we have a whole book of the Bible, the Wisdom of Sirach. The book of Wisdom of Sirach, are called the Book of Sirach, or in your Bibles they call it Ben Sira, which I really wish they hadn't done that, because people are going to be like, "Who's this guy Ben?" And that's not what it is. It's Ben. Ben is son in Hebrew. They should have just translated it literally as the Book of the Son of Sirach. But anyways, he identifies himself in the book. His name is Jesus, the son of Sirach. It was not an unusual name. Yes, it'll take on, obviously, with Jesus and what happens to him. He's crucified. He dies for the sins of the world. He saves us. Of course, Christians are going to see deeper meaning in that, right? In the meaning of his name, God saves, in later events of what happens to him. Okay, but it was a common name. Okay, Christ is not his name. Christ is a title. Jesus the Christ is how he's called. And then eventually they drop the, and it just becomes Jesus Christ. Pretty quickly amongst Christians. But you can see this in the New Testament, in the Greek. Jesus the Christ, the anointed Jesus, which means the same thing. And then later on it becomes kind of like his name, Jesus Christ. Simply Jesus Christ. But it's not. Christ means anointed. Someone to anoint means to pour oil on something. Okay? Krio in Greek. Rub or pour oil on. The Hebrew word is mashach. Okay? Which becomes Mashiach, one who is anointed with oil. Mashiach. In Greek, Christos, one who is anointed with oil. Christ. Okay? So literally, he's Jesus, the one anointed with oil, or the anointed Jesus, however you want to put it in your own mind, if you like literalism. All right, that's what Jesus the Christ means. Jesus Christ. That's why Jews won't say before Christ with the calendar. Yes, most Jews. Some Jews believe in Jesus, but they don't believe Jesus was an anointed one, anointed of God, a king. So they want to call him this. They want to use that title for him. Okay? Jesus, like most people in history in the world, had no last name. He was just Jesus. Well, how do you differentiate? Well, if you want, hey, that's Bob. Where's Bob from? His town. Okay, that's Bob from Sparta. Hey, Bob of Sparta. Oh, yeah, Or you differentiate, so their town. You might differentiate someone by his or her profession, you know? Oh, that's Mary, the pie maker. Or the baker. She has her bakery. So Mary the baker, you know? And if you want to be more specific, in Sparta. So if I go to the town of Sparta in New Jersey, I know we're in Pennsylvania. Let me get a Gwynedd Valley in Pennsylvania, and I go to a local bakery there might be more than one bakery, and there's a name Mary, it might be the same right person. Or you identify someone by his family. That's very common. Dunn, Matthew Dunn, the clan Dunn from Ireland. Okay? John's son. Yeah? Your family. And in a lot of cultures, the family comes first. The family is the most important thing. You begin by identifying what family group you come from. I had a girlfriend who was Korean. God bless her. Beautiful woman. Bo-Yun Lee. Bo-Yun Lee. Brianna was her English name. She was Brianna. But really, that was her anglicized version. It really was Lee Bo-Yun. Lee Bo-Yun. Lee is the family name. Okay? And you want to know that, especially for marriage purposes, yes? Because there are a lot of Lees in Korea. You want to make sure that, it's an indicator of the family group. And if your family groups are related, you might not want to be married together, Hungarians do this. Arabic, they do. In Arabic cultures, they do this. The family name always comes first. Okay, you are the son of so-and-so, so named by, like, your father or something. We don't do that really anymore. We do it in some ways. John's son, yes. Or Smith, John Smith. Apparently there were a lot of Smiths in the Middle Ages. People, blacksmiths who were pounding out horseshoes because that's the most common English last name, Smith, But you have other professions, Scrivener, stuff like that. Cobbler, Cooper, Tanner. Yeah, and we see this all with Jesus in the Gospels. All throughout the Gospels. Jesus is most commonly called from his hometown, Jesus Nazarene. He's a Nazarene. He's from Nazareth. Maybe Ms. Pinto, maybe. But that's what people thought he was from. So he's called Jesus Nazarene. But he's also called, like maybe one place, I think, in the Gospel, only in the Gospel of Mark, I think, Jesus the Carpenter, by his profession. But he's also called Jesus the son of Joseph, by his father, by his family. Okay? How do we know about Jesus? So don't confuse the title with the name. I'm going to skip over this stuff. It's interesting to me, but, some of it I'll talk about later. I don't need to do it now. You see it a little time. If you've read the Gospels, you've read the Gospel of Mark, hopefully, and then later I ask you, I think, to read the Gospel of Matthew. Yes, Mr. Cotillo. Yes, Mr. Cotillo. Which could be it should be easy, because if you read the Gospel of Mark, it's all in the Gospel of Matthew. Just read all the extra stuff that Matthew adds on. and you don't have to read the stuff from Mark if you don't want to. But, basically, what information do we have about Jesus? What can we say about him? His story, all right? Well, we have some stories about his early life, his birth. Actually, two of them. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke. There are four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark has nothing about the early life of Jesus. Jesus just appears. Okay? Same thing with John. Jesus just appears. The story, he just appears and begins his ministry. But Matthew and Luke have two different traditions on where Jesus was born that they do include. From what we don't know, doesn't seem like something they made up themselves. It seems like a pre-existing source that was being circulated amongst Christians that they then included in their stories. And they're called infancy narratives, stories about Jesus as an infant, his birth. Really, it should be called birth narratives. But, because there's really, but I mean, some of the stories involve Jesus as an infant as well after birth. So I guess different traditions about the birth and early boyhood of Jesus. Okay? And what do they agree on? There are a lot of disagreements, and I believe it's the word of God, my brothers and sisters, but you will drive yourself insane trying to make it all work out. These are two different stories, one in Matthew, one in Luke. They really don't agree, okay, except on the most basic details that they know about Jesus. The most basic details are that he had parents, he had a father, quote unquote, supposedly his father, a man named Joseph, who is believed to be Jesus' father, and he had a mother named Mary, or Miriam in Hebrew. Miriam. Okay? Again, two very common Jewish names for men and women in Jewish culture, Joseph and Miriam. Nothing unique about their names. If you're curious what their names mean, I give you a translation, but I'm not going to worry about what their names mean. Just they know the names of his parents. They know that there was something, the stories that Matthew and Luke have both agree that there was something very unusual about the birth of Jesus, meaning that Joseph, even though he seemed to be Jesus' father, at least legally, was apparently not his real father, biologically. The virgin birth. This belief in the virgin birth. Okay, there was something special about the conception of Jesus. He was conceived by Mary without the help of a man. All right, and obviously that's a very early belief in Christianity because it's already there for Matthew and Luke to take from and talk about. They already and to affirm. There's something unusual about the birth of Jesus and his mother. Joseph was not really his father. And they don't try to explain how it worked out. There's no explanation. They just state the belief. Do not confuse, please, virgin birth with immaculate conception. Yes. I'm talking here mainly, Ms. Let's see, what I mentioned today. Next to you left. Hi, Dr. Sucellus, and I'm talking mainly to my Catholic students. Yes, I'm sure you've heard about the Immaculate Conception. It has nothing to do with Jesus, not directly. It is not the virgin birth, all right? The virgin birth means that Mary, his mother, conceived Jesus without sexual activity. She was a virgin, truly a virgin. Not a recovering virgin or something like that. She wasn't raped, okay? She wasn't an adulteress or unfaithful. This was a miracle of God. That's what they're trying to affirm, okay? But it was unusual. Obviously, these things don't usually happen, The Immaculate Conception is with Mary, okay? Again, Mary. Mary was conceived without sin by her mother, but Mother Mary was conceived naturally. Her parents had sex and conceived her, but she was preserved from original sin. Why? Probably because God foreknew that she was going to give birth to his son, or be his son's mother. I'm assuming, okay? I haven't asked God, but So the Immaculate Conception and the virgin birth are not the same thing, okay? Jesus was conceived without sexual activity. Immaculate Conception, Mary was conceived without sin. Two different things. But they always seem to be confused. Get confused. And you see this issue arise in the Gospels. Like the Gospel of John, which has no infancy narrative. As I said, Jesus just appears. But if you read, I think it's in chapter 8 or chapter 10. I always forget whether it's 8 or 10. But anyways, Jesus is having an argument with a group of other Jews, and they make fun of the fact that, Jesus doesn't know where he's from. We know he doesn't know who his father is. Our father is Abraham, Jesus. Remember the guy just talking? Our father is Abraham, Jesus. We don't know who your father is. And Jesus' response is, well, my Father is God. So try to go higher than that. You know? And your father is not Abraham. He says, your father is the devil, Satan. And you're like him. So it seems like they pissed Jesus off a little bit there. He comes back with a really nasty insult. Anyways, I guess he was touchy about it. So Mary is found to be pregnant. No one knows how. It's said to be the work of God. Okay? Jesus is... what do we know about some historical details, most of which we can thank this guy Luke for. Luke was more historical minded than Matthew, and he likes to include contemporary historical details of what was going on at the time. He's not always on point, but like our friend Dennis the Short with the calendar, but he's close enough, and it's helpful. Both Matthew and Luke agree that this Jewish guy, maybe he was a Jew, King Herod was king over Judea and Samaria at the time. The Romans have put this guy Herod as king. Okay? All right. Well, we know when Herod lived. We know when he died. He died in 4 BC. He was king from 37 to 4 BC. I forget when Herod was born. But, he died in 4 BC, Herod. We'll cross here, 4 BC. All right. And Luke tells us that the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time was a man named Caesar Augustus, or Octavian was his name, but he took the title Caesar from his, I think, adoptive father, Julius Caesar, and Augustus, which is a title which means honorable, venerable. So the venerable Caesar, Octavian. And we know when he was head of or reigning over the empire, and when he died, let's see if I can have it here in my notes, I hope so. Don't tell me I don't. Well, anyways, if someone wants half an extra credit point, you can look on your cell phone and tell me, when did Caesar Augustus die? Okay, I know he was contemporaneous with Herod. So that works out. I just forget the exact date when he died. He died in the AD, but I forget which date. I want to say the 20s AD, but huh? 14? That's a little bit too late. The 1400s AD? Is that what you're saying, Ms. Harrison? Yeah, that's little too late by about, AD. But, huh? Yeah, Anno Domini, right? Yeah, but 1480, it still doesn't get us anywhere because I'm probably didn't live over 1400 years. Oh! Damn. That's all right. Well, what? Thank you. In 14 AD. God bless you, people. I'm going to give you both a point for that. So 14 AD. So they were, so Augustus was alive during Herod and died after Herod. He was emperor during Herod's reign. Anyone want to tell me when he started being emperor? I should have written this down. Sorry about that. Does it give that information, Ms. Harrison? Do you have it? What's before 14 AD? Should be a BC when he started. Was that in the 20s? Maybe. No. '27. Okay. So 27 BC until 14 AD. Okay, so he was contemporaneous. And then we got this guy Quirinius, who was a Roman governor up here in Damascus, in the area of Syria. And him, all we need to know about, we know when he was governor, and he was governor from 6 to 7 AD. That's all we need to really worry about with him. Just for 1 year. Okay. All right. So I mean, Quirinius is contemporaneous with Augustus. Augustus is contemporaneous with Herod. Herod's kind of like the problem. Herod was long. Luke tells us that all three of these were alive at the time that Jesus was born. Herod and Augustus work. Augustus and Quirinius work. But Herod and Quirinius do not work. Herod was long dead by the time that this guy Quirinius was the Roman governor of Syria. Do not try to make it work out. People have tried. You'll go insane trying to do it. My explanation is just Luke's close enough. He remembered that there was a census of the people that Quirinius did around the same time, that Augustus, Caesar Augustus was there, and around the time of Herod as well. Okay. That's fine for me. I mean, he's not a modern historian. He's good enough. He's close enough. It gives us a ballpark time frame when we can know when Jesus the Nazarene was born. Okay? Since they both agree that Jesus was born during the kingship of Herod, most scholars, I think, would go with that, would err on that side rather than the Quirinius side. And so that's why Jesus is dated to a few years before the death of Herod, in 6 BC. King Herod was alive. Okay. They also agree. All right. I'll finish this up Thursday. God bless you all. See you on Thursday. Cut out. You're welcome, miss. Have a good day. Hello, sir. Yes.
So this yesterday I tried to do the quiz
Yes.
and my computer just like froze and I couldn't like finish that one.
That can happen, sir. Yes.
And so like when I got back at it like later, it was frozen.
Yeah, it probably submitted it already, so I forget what I have to do on Canvas. I have to go in and give you an extra attempt. Okay? But, please read the syllabus, because there are conditions for allowing you to basically retake the quiz. Since this is the first time, I probably won't put those on you, because it's the first quiz. But you might want to be aware of it for other quizzes, because I won't do it again. Have a good day, miss. But for this quiz, I probably will. I won't make any deductions or anything because I had to reopen. Okay? But thank you, sir. And you might... Yeah. Send me an email, sir, so I'll remember, because I won't remember this conversation. Please send me an email. Thank you. Have a good day, sir.